Imagine a small country on the edge of Europe, with a population barely exceeding 1 million souls, poor soil, and scarce natural resources. And yet, in the 15th century, Portugal became the world's first maritime superpower. How did that happen? It began with Prince Henry the Navigator, whose school at Sagres brought together the best cartographers, astronomers, and seafarers of the age. In 1415, after the capture of Ceuta in Morocco, the Portuguese began pushing down the African coast, bypassing Muslim intermediaries and opening a direct route to the gold fields of Senegal and Guinea. Gold flowed in, strengthening the royal treasury and financing the construction of caravels, light, maneuverable ships capable of sailing against the wind. But gold was only the beginning. The Portuguese monopolized the slave trade, purchasing captives from African rulers and reselling them in Europe and on their Atlantic islands, Madeira, the Azores, and São Tomé. There they established some of the first sugar plantations, where white gold, sugar, brought staggering profits. The climax came in 1498, when Vasco da Gama reached India, opening a sea route to the spice markets, pepper, cloves, nutmeg. These goods, worth many times their weight in gold in Europe, turned Lisbon into the richest city on the continent. One especially interesting feature was the public-private model. The crown invested capital, much like modern venture capitalists, while nobles and merchants risked their lives but received monopoly rights to plantations and trade routes. It was a pragmatic alliance. The state provided protection and legal guarantees, private actors supplied initiative and drive. This unusual arrangement allowed Portugal, for a time, to rise above far larger powers. Now let's turn to neighboring Spain, which in those same years was completing its epic Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. In 1492, after 700 years of conflict, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella captured Granada, uniting Castile and Aragon into a powerful kingdom. The victory unleashed enormous energy, the army was battle-hardened, the treasury replenished, and religious zeal demanded new horizons. Inspired by Portugal's success, the Spanish sought a route to Asia not around Africa, but westward, across the Atlantic. And so Christopher Columbus, a Genoese in Spanish service, set sail with 3 caravels, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, and on October 12, 1492, landed in the Bahamas, believing he had reached India. This was not pure chance, but the result of calculations based on classical geography and rumors of Western Islands. Spain quickly grasped the scale of what had happened. Expeditions followed, revealing the Caribbean, Mexico, and eventually the Pacific Ocean. In 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama and saw what he called the Mar del Sur, the South Sea. Thus began the era in which Spain, relying on military strength and religious fervor, built an empire on which the sun never set. But this discovery immediately triggered conflict with Portugal. Why? Papal bulls, formal and highly authoritative decrees issued by the Pope, sealed with lead, or sometimes gold, such as Inter Cetera, 1493, issued by Pope Alexander VI, granted Spain all lands west of a meridian drawn 100 leagues from the Azores. The Portuguese, already in control of the African route and wary of competition, threatened war. Portugal was far smaller than Spain, but its navy was stronger, its oceanic experience greater, and Spain, fresh from the Reconquista, was not prepared for a maritime confrontation. In 1494, diplomats gathered in the Spanish town of Tordesillas. After heated negotiations, the line was moved 370 leagues, about 1,000 miles, farther west, a compromise proposed by Portugal. Spain received the west, including the future Americas, Portugal secured the east, including Africa, India, and, as it later turned out, Brazil, discovered by Pedro Álvares Cabral in 1500. This was not an unequal division but a calculated gamble. The Portuguese believed Asian spices were the ultimate prize, while the Americas still seemed like a string of islands with little obvious value. The treaty prevented war between the Catholic monarchies and formalized their spheres of influence with papal approval, a masterpiece of diplomacy balancing ambition with pragmatism. Let us return to the New World. Why, after landing in the Caribbean, did the Spanish push along the western, Pacific coast of South America rather than the eastern Atlantic side? The answer lies in rumors and treasure. When Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama, indigenous peoples on the Pacific coast spoke of wealthy empires farther south. Beginning in 1524, Francisco Pizarro, inspired by tales of rich kingdoms, sailed southward from Panama along the coast. By then, the Spanish had already established small shipyards on Panama's Pacific side and built vessels there for such expeditions. In the Andes, they encountered the Inca Empire, Tawantinsuyu, with millions of subjects, an extensive road system, cities, and, above all, gold and silver. The eastern coast, Amazonia and the Pampas, seemed like wilderness, jungles, swamps, and nomadic tribes without centralized authority. Crossing the continent was nearly impossible. Moreover, Spain was bound by the 1494 treaty with Portugal. Starting a war over these remote territories made little sense. The West, by contrast, offered dense populations to exploit, Inca infrastructure to control, and the silver mines of Potosí, discovered in 1545, which poured out silver in staggering quantities. Spain established the Viceroyalty of Peru, with its capital in Lima, integrating the territories of modern Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia into a vast imperial system. Spain made a rational choice. It went where wealth was already organized and could be rapidly harnessed. There was, of course, no Panama Canal in those days. The route around the continent through the Strait of Magellan was long and extremely dangerous. Storms raged there much of the year, and with the technology of the time, 2 out of 3 ships might easily be lost. So Spanish silver from Potosí was transported to Arica and Callao, then shipped to Panama. From there it crossed the isthmus by mule along the Royal Road, a stone-paved trail leading to Nombre de Dios, later to Portobelo. The fleets departing from there usually assembled in Cartagena de Indias, in present-day Colombia, and/or Havana, in present-day Cuba. A heavily guarded convoy would then sail across the Atlantic to Spain. Even so, they were periodically attacked and robbed by English privateers, essentially independent pirates, operating under the authority of the English crown. An interesting detail, the Pacific Squadron, whose ships carried cargo along the western coast, did not come from Europe. It was built locally, in the Viceroyalty of Peru. The city of Guayaquil, now in Ecuador, was then surrounded by dense forests of balsa, yellow cedar, which is not a true cedar, and guayacan, woods well suited for shipbuilding. Major shipyards quickly emerged, and the city became the heart of naval construction in Spain's colonial empire. From 1547 onward, galleons were built there using local labor, indigenous people, mestizos, and imported African slaves. Materials that could not be sourced locally, gunpowder, sails, were delivered via Panama, but the ships themselves were constructed on site, avoiding the dangers of the Strait of Magellan. It was a rational solution. The empire adapted, the colony became a production center capable of sustaining its own logistics. Looking at modern Guayaquil today, one would hardly guess how vital a role it once played. Panama, through which precious cargo was hauled from one ocean to the other, became one of the richest, and therefore most frequently attacked places in the New World. The most dramatic raid came in 1671, when the Welsh buccaneer Henry Morgan, leading some 1,200 men, crossed the Isthmus of Panama, sacked and burned Panama City, the empire's bowl of gold. Silver, pearls, slaves, everything was carried off to the ships, and the city lay in ruins. Morgan departed with loot worth millions of pesos, leaving terror in his wake. The episode showed how fragile even the most powerful system can be when too much wealth is concentrated in a single point. Why did I tell you all this? I simply found myself wondering why the western coast was colonized earlier than the eastern one, which at first glance seems irrational from a logistical standpoint, given that ships were the primary means of transport and crossing the continent was so difficult. And unexpectedly, the answer turned out to be fascinating. at least to my slightly obsessive mind. History is often not a random chain of events, but a sequence of pragmatic decisions driven by the search for resources and the desire to control existing centers of power. Thank you for listening. If you think this was interesting, hit like and subscribe.